Successful Mind Podcast.
Successful people learn how to make their minds work for them. I'm David Nagel, and this is the Successful Mind Podcast. Hey everyone, this is David Nagel. I'd like to welcome you to our summer series. This is a 6-part series on building the business of your dreams. I mean, let's face it, the real reason that we build a business is not just to serve other people, which is fantastic, but it's also so that we can live the lifestyle that we truly want to live. Yet the truth around that is that most people actually don't. I mean, if you look at the statistics of people that start businesses, people that own small businesses, entrepreneurs of any kind, the statistical numbers are actually pretty horrific when you think about the amount of people that actually succeed. But it really doesn't need to be that way. I personally believe, after being in business for 25 years, that the statistical numbers of people that actually fail in business, why those numbers are so big, is because people do not understand the mindset foundation of what it takes to run a successful business. Business itself is nothing more than understanding the law of cause and effect and how your product or service relates to the community of people that it's going to benefit. But it all starts with you. And it starts with your mind and how you're thinking about what you want to create and how you want to actually serve people within the marketplace itself. So I want to ask you a question. What do you think the hardest question is that you've ever been asked? I remember back when I was in my early 20s, somebody said to me, when I was really struggling, let me preface that. I was struggling with the idea of what did I want to do with my life? And there was an intensity behind it because I had created a myriad of situations in my life that really weren't good. I quit high school when I was 17. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with the educational system. In one way, it was the best decision I ever made. In another way, at that point in time, it made things actually very difficult for me. But the idea behind it was that I just wanted to get out there in the workplace. I wanted to see what life was about. I wanted to understand how things worked. This regimented idea of learning things that didn't matter didn't seem to appeal to me at all. But when I actually put forth some effort in doing things that seemed to make a difference, there was some interest in that. I mean, I actually made some progress in my younger years at first. But I ran into a problem that I didn't know. So remember what I said. Mindset is the thing that basically makes you or it breaks you. So I was doing well when it was just me, but I quickly got married. I had a couple of children, and I found out that my responsibilities started to outpace my skill set. And I ran into the trouble of not being able to pay my bills. And then we had a problem with the economy, not so much unlike what we're going through today, even though today's actually probably a lot worse. But it caused me to be stuck in a situation where I was out of control. In other words, I didn't have the ability to increase my income to match what was happening with the economy, to match the increase in responsibility that I had. So I was literally creating myself into a victim. I was putting myself in the mindset of a victim. Here I am suffering, really having all kinds of difficulty. I mean, when I talk about difficulty, my car was repossessed. We had to leave our apartment building in the middle of the night because we couldn't pay the rent. I was let go from one job or another. We were paying bills constantly late. We ended up on food stamps for a period of time, living in a bad neighborhood. It was not good, and it wasn't getting better. It was actually getting worse. Through a small mindset change that took place about 2 years after this bad run started, my whole life began to change instantaneously. And for almost 30 years now, I've been telling people the key to why my life changed and why it's so good today has to do primarily with mindset. So I want you to think about something. All the information that ever was is readily available to everybody and mostly for free these days. There's not anything that you can't look up on the internet anymore. And with chat, with AI, or I'm sorry, with AI, there's basically not an answer. You can get an answer to almost anything at this point. Yet people still readily fail, make huge mistakes. We live in a world that would allow you to become a multimillionaire if you actually knew what to do and had the discipline to be able to do it. It's not something that's a huge secret anymore. We have more people today becoming millionaires than any other time in history. A matter of fact, one of the things that I know for sure, because not only have I done it, I've literally helped thousands of other people do the same thing, and that's you can make a lot of money. You can literally become wealthy in a very short period of time relative to what it would take you if you were working a job for somebody else. But in order for all of this to actually work, you have to understand how to think about it. And the starting place for that most people are not aware of, is simply this. It's asking yourself the most important question of your life. What do you want? What do you want? When I was first asked this question and I began to internalize it and ask myself that question, I didn't have an answer. My answer was more about what I didn't want. And ask yourself if this is true for you. When you ask yourself, what do I want? Do you think more about the things that you don't want in life, the problems that you're having, the difficulties that you're going through, the idea or the using your imagination in a way to create problems possibly in the future, like thinking about, I'm afraid this will happen or that'll happen, focusing on what could go wrong versus what could go absolutely right? For most people, that's actually the case. That's why so many people actually suffer today. People are completely stuck. And it's not, like I said, it's not because of a lack of knowledge. We have more free knowledge that is literally instantaneously at the fingertips of most people today than any other time in history. And yet they continue to suffer. They continue to be broke. They continue to not have the ability to create the money or the lifestyle that they want, and they continue to buy into the negativity that is perpetuated all over the globe on a consistent basis. In order to tap into the freedom that I know that you want, you wouldn't even be listening to this or watching this if you didn't want freedom. You have to start to learn how to think, and that requires that, number one, we have to know, how do we use this magnificent mind of ours, and how do we use it in a disciplined way where we can literally follow through on the things that we know that we need to do to create the result. So one of the things that I want to do to just kind of briefly mention right now is, if you're listening to this, we have a visual version of this also on YouTube. So you can get the entire experience if you go to YouTube. Now, let me put this, just kind of put this out there. When you think about what you want, I want you to think about it in a way where there's no limitations to it. Because the first thing that we need to do is we need to engage our imagination so that we can engage something else that's, I don't say that this is a secret, it's just something that people don't know. And I'm going to draw this on my screen here so that you can actually get a visual in your mind of what this looks like. So when I say the word that I'm about to say, you have an idea of how that looks in your mind. You have a visual description of it, and you have an internal idea of how it works. So the word that I want to use is desire. And if you have an opportunity, write that word down. I would like you to write it down and keep it in front of you on a regular basis for a period of time. Because in order for this to actually begin to work so that you're engaging in what I'm about to teach, you do have to put some effort into thinking about this for a period of time. And the reason for that is because you're going to have contradicting thoughts based on what I'm going to say that are going to tell you that you can't do this, or that's not true, or how could so many people miss something that seems so easy or so simple, or there's no way that that's right. And you're going to use your memory in a way where it's designed to be programmed from the day that you're born filled with all kinds of ideas, images, and meanings from other people that tell you how the world works. However, most of it is actually incorrect, because the ideas, I want you to think about it like this. All the information that you received from the moment that you were born until now, what was that information primarily used for? What do we actually teach children? We teach children how to grow up and how to survive in the world that we live in, which is, by the way, changing faster than any other time in history. But that's the idea. We want kids to learn how to survive in the world that we live in. We want them to learn how to be safe. We want them to learn how to be self-sufficient. And the current way that we actually do that does none of the things that I just mentioned. What it actually does is it makes them dependent upon other people. They really don't, they may think that they have autonomy and they may think that they have freedom of choice, but really it's an illusion. It's the idea that their idea of freedom of choice is within the structure of looking at what options they believe are available and then choosing between those two options. It's not asking the question, what do I want? Now, I want you to think about this part for a moment. Every other form of life that we're aware of does not get tripped up with the idea of what does it want. Right? You think of a squirrel or a moose or a flower or a fish, any other form of life, okay? It knows what it is. It knows what it's supposed to do every day. It doesn't get stuck. It doesn't struggle. It doesn't self-sabotage. It doesn't have the ability to procrastinate. It does exactly what it is that the universe or God programmed it to do on a daily basis. And nature thrives, I mean literally thrives, unless human beings get involved. Very often human beings get involved and they destroy nature in many different ways. But my point is that nature's going to thrive as long as nothing else gets in the way of it and prevents it in some way. Why? Because it's designed to succeed. You are also designed to succeed. Every human being is born to be a success. Now, ask yourself, how do you think about that thought? What goes through your mind when I say that? Every human being is born to be a success. You probably think about, what about all the people that aren't? Well, that's a really good question. I used to ask myself the same question, but think about this for a moment. A human being is born to be a success unless they grow up in an environment that tells them why they can't be a success, or perhaps what's wrong with being a success, or dictates to them what the components of success actually are for a person, instead of letting them come to their own determination that they can be a success and encouraging that from the moment that they are born. That they literally can do whatever shows up in their heart's desire. In fact, not only can they do it, but it is literally a direction from God as far as what their purpose is here on life. But if you're anything like me, you weren't taught that as a child at all. A matter of fact, you're taught the opposite. I was taught you can't have anything that you want. Money doesn't grow on trees. You should be satisfied with everything that you have. You should not want anything more than you should have. If you wanted anything more, people would say, you don't need that. Do with what we have. It was constant ideas over and over again about why we couldn't go beyond the station of the way that we lived at that moment in time. And then, of course, you have another thing that goes along with that, which is we're really kind of limited by our experience depending on the situation that we're born in. And that's no joke. That's a real thing. I mean, people all over the world are born into different situations, but people all over the world are not stuck in those situations for life. They can get out, and they can get out if they learn how to think. And that's what we're here to do over this 6-part series. We're here to teach you how to think. This image is called a stick person, and it was created by Dr. Thurman Fleet in 1934 for the specific reason of teaching doctors how to visualize how the mind worked. Because in 1934, every time he was working with doctors and he talked about the mind, the doctors had an image in their own head of a brain, and not actually how the mind works from a conscious, a subconscious, and a body action perspective. So it was confusing. So he came up with this teaching tool, which is very simple. And thank goodness it's simple, because it allows us to take something that can be quite complicated and break it down into simple terms where we can all understand how to actually use it and how it applies in our life. So a crash course on this is pretty easy. The top part of this head is the conscious mind. The bottom part of the head is the subconscious mind. This little round fella here is the body, and it's the place where we take action. So all thoughts that we think, the idea is we want to move them into action, but we have to understand how to think the right thoughts. Most of us are just filled with thoughts that, number one, we don't want to think, but we're programmed to think, which I'll explain in a moment, and that we consistently take action on every day because somebody else told us that's what we should do. And that's where it gets to this part of the mind here. We're going to focus on the bottom part of the head just temporarily here. This is what's known as the subconscious mind. Now, the subconscious mind, just for the purpose of explaining this, has two parts. We have the programmed part, and we have what I call the desire, or the heart's desire part. Now, that means that you, right now, as you're watching this or as you're listening to this, in your subconscious mind, you have two basic ideas in there. One is the programmed part. That's all the information, that's all the ideas, that's all the meanings about everything, and the experiences that you've had your whole life have been programmed into that part of your subconscious mind. The other part of the subconscious mind is your purpose-filled desire that you were actually put here for to produce in your lifetime. That desire not only will make you happy and healthy and wealthy, but it will be something that will guide you for the rest of your life without confusion and without struggle and without the opinion of other people. In other words, you won't have to walk around and say, "What do you think I should do?" There's an internal voice that will tell you what to do, but you have to understand how to get to know it, how to access it, and how to follow that direction. And we're going to show you how to do that. Now, the program part of the mind, how does this actually work? This is important that I touch on this briefly. When we're born, the conscious part of the mind, this part here, is not developed. All we have is the subconscious mind, like this. The conscious mind starts to develop around 7 years old, and it continues to develop into our early 20s. Now, these two parts of the mind there's various different ways that they operate, and it's important because they operate in coordination with each other, but differently. The subconscious mind is the part of the mind where the information that goes in based on patterns becomes fixed. And that's the part of the mind where we don't have to think. Think about driving a car for a moment. This is a really good example. If you were to sit down and you were to actually mark down on a sheet of paper every single movement you make to drive a car, every interpretation you make to drive a car, everything that you see, everything that you hear, every internal judgment, like putting your foot on the brake to stop at a light, and then a car slams on the brakes in front of you, and you're able to accommodate that, and you do it all without thinking, knowing how fast that you can go in coordination with the idea of how long it's going to take you to stop so that you don't run into the car in front of you, scanning around you to see if there's anything that's going to jump in front of your car. With the amount of people that drive versus the accidents that we have, it's actually very few compared to how many people that do that. And the whole time, the subconscious mind is actually operating that vehicle, probably 98% of the drive. Have you ever driven somewhere and you didn't remember the drive? Perhaps you were thinking about where you were going or where you had been or what you're going to do when you get there, or you were listening to music, or you were listening to a podcast, or you were listening to a book, or you're having a conversation with somebody that's in the car or on the phone, and the whole time you're driving. How is that possible? Because your subconscious mind knows exactly what to do, and it's operating 24 hours a day, and it scans your world like a radar, and then it feeds back the programmed information that's in it that tells us how to react and behave and feel and think about everything that we're experiencing. From the moment of conception, that subconscious mind is consistently taking in all the information around it, all the thoughts, all the ideas, all the feelings, and all the experiences, and that becomes fixed in our subconscious mind as programming or patterns. Programming or patterns. And this part is very important to begin to really grasp onto. When you look at this screen, what would you call it? Okay. When you look at your car, what would you call it? When you look at your house, what would you call it? What are the meanings of all of those different things? Where did those meanings come from? What I'm getting at here is that everything that you observe in life and that you've had experience with has a meaning to it, but you didn't create the meaning. Somebody told you what everything meant in your life. From the very moments of your conception, people were telling you what things meant, all the way up to now. So the truth is, how do you know things mean exactly what somebody else told you? People can only give you information that they've learned that somebody gave to them, and so on and so on and so on. It's pretty well known that most of our beliefs and our values go back about 7 generations, and that they're passed down from one generation to another without giving a whole lot of thought as to whether or not the meaning behind the thing that we're teaching our children and our grandchildren is actually something that's going to move their life forward. Most of the meanings that we create and that we give to other people are reactions that we have based on life and other meanings that we were given. How many meanings have you literally created from scratch on your own about your life and where you're actually going in your life? That's a fantastic question to ask. Otherwise, you're just responding to life based on what other people told you. Now, if you're one of these people, if you literally want to have a different life, if you want to have a different experience of your life than the people that raised you or the people that you're surrounded by, if you want to live your dream, if you want to build a magnificent business, if you want to choose to live the life that you choose to live, don't you think you're going to have to change the meanings and the understanding that you're operating from versus listening to people that don't have those results in their life? Think about it. All the people that I'm just talking about that you're exposed to in your life, how many of them actually have the results that you would like to experience? My guess is probably very few. And that's the way that it is with most people. Of course, that there's people in the world where they're born into a situation where people already have expanded their thought process and they help them along. But I don't think you'd be listening to this if that was your situation. I think your situation is much like mine, where you were raised in a loving environment with people, but they really didn't live the life that you aspire to live to. And that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. That is showing that our mind is actually advancing from one generation to another. And that desire that's behind that wanting is trying to come out. It's trying to express itself. Your wanting, your desire to do something beyond anything that you've done before is, or anything anybody else has done before, is really evidence that this desire is coming from within us. I think it's part of our physical DNA, and I think it's part of our spiritual DNA. There's nothing that's created in the universe that is for a waste. Everything has a specific purpose. And with us having such an amazing intellect, I mean, we've got a better intellect than basically every animal or plant or living thing on the planet that we're currently aware of. And yet we have more problems than anything else does. Something's definitely wrong there. And if we begin to address it from the place inside of ourselves that's causing the problem, we can actually learn how to fix it. And I'm going to show you how to fix it in a relatively short period of time so that you can live the life that you want. Now, this desire is something that we have to be woken up to, but there's no way that it actually wakes up until we start thinking to ourselves, what do we want? But now we have to go past something even different. And the idea is this: when you think what you want, what is the voice that comes into your head after you ask yourself that question or after you think about the idea? Do you think about why you can't do it? Do you think about what would be wrong with doing it? Do you have doubt around yourself or other people? Do you have fear, or do you worry? Do you have trust issues when it comes to the things that you want to do, or perhaps even working with other people? So that conversation, that talk is actually happening in our conscious mind. What we have here is the subconscious mind is actually looking at the results, the circumstances, and the environment that we're in. And just to go a little bit deeper on this, environment is made up of people, places, and things. Now, this is important. Make a note of that in your mind, because I'm going to talk more about how the universe or spirit or God talks to you in your life. It's not just internal, but all opportunities come from people, places, and things. Spirit often expresses itself in reaching out to you through people, places, and things to move you from where you are now to where it is that you want to go. But your subconscious mind, the programmed part, it sees, it observes results, circumstances, and environment. It thinks to itself, man, I would love to change this. I would love to do something completely different here. That is a nudging from this part, the desire. And then you have this self-talk that comes up. The desire part says, you can do it. I can do this. Okay? The programming part says, no, you can't. And because we have more experience with this programming, the programming starts getting us to look, to observe with our senses, okay? We have 5 senses. We see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. It gets us to observe our outside world and look for evidence based on the idea of what we can't. However, you're different. And I don't even know you, but I can tell you how I know you're different, because you're listening to this. If you weren't different than the average person walking down the street, you wouldn't be listening to this. And it doesn't matter how you got here. It doesn't matter whether somebody gave you this or you found it by accident or you've been listening to my podcast for years. You are different. And the time for you to express that difference in your life is now. There is no other time. There's only now. Now, the thing is this. In order to get everything that I'm going to teach you to begin to move forward, in order for change to really happen and become permanent fixed change that you absolutely love, you have to ask yourself the hardest question in the world, and that is, what do I want? And you have to answer it at least a little bit, right? It doesn't have to be everything that you want for your whole life. It doesn't have to be in great detail. But you need to answer a little bit of this. And I'd like you to do that between this podcast and the next one in the series. Okay, there's 6 parts to this. See if you can accomplish that one thing. Think about what I've said. Listen to this over and over again. Begin to imagine in your mind, this is extremely important. Imagine in your mind the life that you would like to live. Build it in great detail in your imagination. Really think about it. Don't put any limits on it. In other words, if you had all the money and resources that you could possibly have, and everybody went along with you on your journey, you could have whatever you want. There was no resistance, and you knew that you couldn't fail in this idea and in this creation of the life that you want. What would you pick for yourself? What would you honestly pick for yourself? So between now and the second part of this series, I want you to think about, what do you want? Remember, it's the hardest question everybody has to answer in their life. However, all it takes to answer the question is a decision to say, I'm going to allow myself, I'm going to give myself permission to answer this question. Now, the reason that I use that word is, and I'll go into this a little deeper later on, most of us never let go of the idea that to do something that we've never done before, we need permission. And the reason for that is because for the first 20 years of our life, we needed permission for everything. That doesn't change overnight. Just because you turn 18 or 20 or 21 or 25 does not mean that your subconscious mind does not go, wait a minute, we need permission to do that, but not even actually think about it from that perspective. It just shows up as I can't. But you don't know why you're saying I can't. I know why you're saying you can't, because the first thing that you need is permission. I'm giving you permission to think whatever thoughts that you want, to think about the desire in your heart. You meet me halfway here. Give yourself permission to do the same. And I'll see you on the next session. Thanks for listening to the Successful Mind Podcast. If you like what you heard and you want to learn more, go to lifeisnowinc.com. I'll see you next week.